Hello, everyone. This is Karina Marquez from the USHCC. We will be getting started very shortly. Just want to give a few more folks the opportunity to hop on. Hi, everyone. This is Karina Marquez with the USHCC. We're just waiting for a few more people to hop on, and we'll get started very shortly. Hello, everyone. My name is Karina Marquez, and I am the Hispanic Business Enterprise Development Director at the United States Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. I want to thank you all for joining us today for what will be a fantastic webinar delivered by Paychex. Today we'll be covering HR101 Hiring, Onboarding, and Paying Employees. We are joined by HR generalist Zoe Reyes, who has been with Paychex since 2016. Prior to Paychex, she had 5 years of experience in HR in California. In her current role, Zoe assists clients in a variety of industries, developing handbooks, implementing company policies, and ensuring they are compliant in federal, state, and local laws. She also conducts relevant seminars to clients and their employees. We are very lucky to have her joining us today. So without further ado, before we get started, I would like you all to please hold your questions until the end of the Q&A portion. However, you may chat your questions through the chat box that you should see on your screen, and then we will get to them at the Q&A portion at the very end. So with that, it is my pleasure to pass it along to Zoe. And yeah, Zoe, take it away.
Thanks so much, Karina. Welcome everyone to the training today. So before we get started, we just have to go over a brief legal disclaimer. So Karina, if you wouldn't mind switching to the next slide for me, please. Thank you so much. So I must remind everyone that this is a Paychex Human Resources presentation, and it should not be considered legal advice of any specific facts or circumstances. This presentation is intended for general information purposes only. If you have specific questions, we encourage you to consult with legal counsel. Next slide. Oops, I think one more back, the one that says HR. Thank you. So since this is a high-level introduction to these functions, we're calling this seminar HR 101. So today we'll be discussing the following topics: crafting a job description, interviewing and hiring, the Form I-9, employee classification, overtime rules, paying employees, and leaves of absence, such as FMLA. Next slide. So attracting the best candidates for your open position can often depend on creating accurate job descriptions that truly stand out. By tossing together a job description at the last minute or making a few small but significant mistakes in the description, you could receive a flood of applications from people who don't have the qualifications for your job, or possibly open your company up to a discrimination lawsuit, which is definitely something that we want to avoid. So some certain basic information should be considered when you're creating this job description, such as the job title, the job objective or a purpose statement, a description of the position's responsibilities, scope, and functions, a list of individual tasks to be performed, and make sure to identify the essential job functions, a description of the role within the organization and the relationship to other jobs, skills and qualifications required for the position, such as education, experience, licensing, and/or physical requirements, and location. Next slide, please. So beyond the basic job description, there are some areas to focus on to help you find the best employees. So focus on the job title. Job seekers will frequently conduct their online search by job title. So this wouldn't be the place where you'd want to experiment with unique or creative job titles. Also, make sure when you're deciding on your job title that it is non-discriminatory. For example, salesperson. List key responsibilities, skills, and qualifications. Listing the job's key functions and an approximate percentage of the time these functions are required can give the candidate a good idea of what the position actually entails. Also, don't forget to include any physical requirements. So if they are required to lift at least 50 pounds, for example, please make sure to put that in your job description. Don't leave out travel requirements. So if travel is a necessary part of your open position, be sure to mention that on the job description. This can really help filter out candidates with no interest in traveling for a job. Consider including information on both benefits and salary. Applicants generally want to know about healthcare benefits and retirement plan options. So if these are things that your company offers, be sure to consider including it on the job description. Many qualified job seekers will skip past the job description with no reference to salary, so consider making a mention of the salary range for that position. Focus on language and format. Consider bullet points and language that is clear, concise, and reader-friendly. Keywords count, but not in excess. So use language that's logical, put yourself in the job seeker's shoes, and appropriate to your industry. It's all about the candidate. So candidates generally want to know about the type of person you're seeking, the roles and responsibilities of that position, and why the job might be right for them. After you meet this obligation, promote your employer brand with a brief rundown of what makes your business special and why exceptional job seekers should want to work there. A well-crafted job description and job posting can improve the chances you'll find the best candidate for the job. Next slide. So in the HR business, we like to use behavior-based interviewing to obtain insight into the candidate. One proven process is called the STAR model. So STAR is an acronym that stands for Situation, Task, Action, and Result. So some sample interview questions might be, tell me about a time when you had difficulty communicating with a customer or coworker. What did you do to address the issue, and what was the result? Or another example could be, give me an example of when you showed initiative and took the lead, even if you were not the designated leader. While these aren't your typical way of asking the applicant about themselves or their background, the response provided can give you a glimpse into how the applicant would handle a similar situation if employed by your company. It's also critically important that interview questions do not solicit information that employers are legally barred from considering in the hiring process, such as their membership in a protected class, which could include age, gender, religion, race, ethnicity, disability, etc. Next slide, please. So when you do decide to hire a new employee, there are some laws and regulations that you need to know about. So new hire reporting. Employers are required by the Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Reconciliation Act to report a new hire to the appropriate state agency. This information is used to locate parents who owe child support. It must be filed within 20 days if it's submitted by mail, or twice a month if it's submitted electronically. And you can learn more about the specific hire reporting agency in your state at the link provided on the slide. So the Form I-9 Employment Eligibility Verification Form, hopefully you've all heard of this, but you as the employer are required by U.S. immigration laws to confirm that your new employee is eligible to work in this country. The U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, also known as USCIS, enforces this requirement with the Form I-9. Form I-9 is used to verify an individual's identity and eligibility for employment in the U.S. Companies should have employees fill out the Section 1 of the form no later than the first day of work for pay. Employers are required to fill out and sign Section 2 within 3 business days of the employee's first paid working day. While it isn't necessary to submit Form I-9 to the USCIS, employers must retain completed Forms I-9 for all current employees hired after November of 1986 for 3 years after the date of hire, or 1 year after the date employment is terminated for former employees, whichever date comes later. Next slide. So overtime rules. So the FLSA, or the Fair Labor Standards Act, established standards and requirements for minimum wage, child labor, overtime, and record keeping at the federal level. Overtime rules are one of the main reasons you'll need to be aware of this law. The FLSA recognizes 2 types of classifications of employees, exempt and non-exempt. Exempt status is primarily determined based on job duties being paid on a salary basis and salary level. Non-exempt employees are subject to all of the Act's provisions, including overtime pay. The FLSA does not limit the number of hours each week that employees age 16 or over may work. However, it does require employers to pay an overtime premium to non-exempt employees who work over 40 hours in a work week. However, your state laws may differ. This is just at the federal level. Under the FLSA, overtime pay must be at a rate of at least 1.5 times the employee's regular rate of pay. Generally, employers are not permitted to average the hours of 2 or more work weeks. Each work week is considered on its own for overtime purposes, regardless of the employer's pay frequency. Overtime pay cannot be waived. So even if an employer announces no overtime or the employee signs an agreement to not work or to be paid a premium for time worked over 40 hours each week, the employer is still required by law to pay the appropriate overtime rate. Next slide. The frequency at which you pay your employees is generally regulated by a state statute. So some options in pay frequencies include weekly, bi-weekly, which is every 2 weeks, semi-monthly, twice per month, or monthly. Employers can usually establish the actual payday as long as they adhere to the applicable pay frequency law mandated by that state. Once chosen, it needs to be communicated to all employees and followed. Where permitted, employers may also elect to pay employees using a mixed pay frequency. For example, some employees could be paid weekly and others could be paid monthly. For some types of businesses, like restaurants, payroll can be a little more complicated because there are several forms of compensation with varying tax treatments that can make up an employee's paycheck. Next slide. So payroll taxes, you may be required to withhold specific employment taxes from your employee's pay, including federal income tax, Social Security and Medicare, state and local income tax, and state unemployment insurance. So with federal income tax, the amount to withhold is based on IRS withholding tables, the employee's taxable compensation and marital status, number of allowances, and the exemptions that the employee reports on the Form W-4. Social Security and Medicare, also known as FICA, the Federal Insurance Contributions Act. Employees are required to contribute a percentage of their wages to support the financing of this system, with employers generally making matching contributions. State and local income tax. Generally, every employer who pays employee wages is required to withhold income taxes from each payment of taxable wages, if required by the state or local taxing agencies. So not all states have withholding tax, and many states do not have local taxing jurisdictions that affect payroll. Employers who conduct business operations in multiple states must meet the requirements of all the states involved. State unemployment insurance, or also known as SUI. SUI is primarily an employer-paid tax. However, a few states require employees to contribute to the state's unemployment compensation program as well. So you, as the employer, you may be required to pay the following taxes: Social Security and Medicare, FICA, federal unemployment tax, state unemployment insurance, and state disability. So for Social Security and Medicare, or FICA, along with your employees, you may be required to contribute to Social Security and Medicare. You are liable for the entire tax, regardless of the amount actually withheld from employees. After the total liability is calculated and the amount collected from employees is subtracted, you are responsible for paying the remaining portion. For federal unemployment tax, FUTA tax is used strictly to pay administrative costs and fund state programs as needed. The Act established the employer tax that finances the federal unemployment program. FUTA is strictly an employer tax, so no part of this tax can be deducted from employee wages. Each covered employer must file a Form 940, Employer's Annual Federal Unemployment Tax Return, annually to report taxable wages paid during the year and reconcile quarterly FUTA tax deposits. So for SUI, the SUI program pays the actual benefits to unemployed workers. Employers are responsible for paying SUI tax based on the number of employees in the business and a rate assigned by the state. All states require employers to pay SUI tax. Each state has a limit on compensation that is taxable for SUI. The wage limits vary by state. And in state disability, the primary purpose of disability taxes is to provide benefit payments to employees absent from their jobs because of illness, accident, or disease not related to their employment. Plans vary by state, with employers paying the full amount in some states and employers and workers sharing the cost in others. Next slide. Okay, Family and Medical Leave Act. So many employers offer paid and unpaid time off as part of their employee fringe benefits package. And this could include vacation, sick time, personal days, or floating days. There may be circumstances when an employee may need to take time off from work due to their own disability or for another reason covered under applicable state and federal leave laws. The Family and Medical Leave Act, or FMLA, which applies to all public sector employers and to private businesses with 50 or more employees, it allows for a maximum of 12 weeks of unpaid job-protected time off from work during a 12-month period for a qualified reason. And some of those qualified reasons could include to care for their own serious health condition or to care for a covered family member with a serious health condition, the birth or placement of a child and to bond with the child, and any qualifying exigency arising out of the fact that the employee's spouse, son, daughter, or parent is a military member on cover active duty. So there are some requirements for someone to be eligible for FMLA. An employee must work for a covered employer for at least 12 months and have worked at least 1,250 hours in the prior 12-month period and work at a location where the employer has at least 50 employees within a 75-mile radius. When an employee returns from FMLA leave, there are exceptions that apply to this, but generally speaking, they must be restored to their original job or an equivalent position with equal pay, benefits, and other conditions. Employees who are covered on FMLA leave are entitled to continuation of their health insurance, but may be required to make contributions to the cost of such insurance at the same rate as prior to the leave. Employees may also be eligible for leaves under state law. Next slide, please. So as you can see, there are many considerations surrounding hiring, paying, and providing leave to your employees. Staying in compliance with applicable laws is critical. You can support your client compliance efforts with regular, comprehensive manager training, accurate documentation and records, and appropriate HR management tools. You may also decide to hire an accountant, a tax professional, or another outside vendor to deal with your tax-related processes. It is important, however, that all business owners have an understanding of employment-related laws as well as regulations. So the responsibility for fulfilling these obligations is ultimately yours. Next slide, please. And thank you. That's it. So hopefully everyone got a lot out of that training, but I think we can switch it back over to Karina for questions and answers.
Hi, everyone. Karina again. Please feel free to type in some questions into the chat box that you see on your screen. We currently have one question here from Alejandro. He asked, how long does the I-9 form have to be kept and why? And that's for you all. Zoe, on the line?
Yes, sorry, I had myself muted for a second. That's a great question. So there are some rules around keeping the Form I-9. So let me read those to you now. So everyone who's been hired after November 6th of 1986 must have an I-9 on file. So you either need to keep those for 3 years after the date of hire or 1 year after the date employment is terminated for former employees. So whichever one is later. And actually, if you go onto the I-9 or the USCIS website, there is an I-9 portal, and there's a little calculation where you can put in what year the employee was hired, what year they were terminated, and it'll help determine how long you have to keep the form for. So it's a really helpful tool.
Wonderful. Please feel free to send a question. If you have any more questions, we'll take about a minute for you all to send some in. All right, we have another question on the line. Zoe, can you describe the difference between exempt and non-exempt employees again in reference to the PowerPoint?
Yes, great question. So from a federal standpoint, the FLSA talks about the two different classifications. So exempt truly means a salaried employee. So someone that's being paid on a salary basis. It doesn't really matter how many hours they're working, they're going to get the same pay every pay period. Whereas a non-exempt employee is, we like to call it also an hourly employee. So they are someone that you'd be tracking their hours, asking them to submit a time card, and they would also be eligible for overtime pay. Also, just one thing to point out, in some states, there are regulations around non-exempt employees having to record their rest and meal breaks as well.
Wonderful. Next question is, can you go into a little bit more clarity about the staying in compliance that you referenced earlier in the question? Perhaps about the I-9 forms?
Are you talking about the staying in compliance slide on the presentation, or how long to keep the I-9 form for?
The staying compliance slide on the presentation.
Sure. Do you want to go back to that one? It was the previous one just before this.
Okay, yeah.
So basically, this slide is just really talking about ways in general that employers can stay in compliance. So some suggestions around that are having, regular manager training. So doing things like this, or communicating, if you have an HR department in your companies, connecting with your HR department, making sure that you're up to date with any documentation. So whether that's state-specific new hire forms that you need, or just new hire forms in general, separation forms. Those will vary by state, but that is something that you can do to make sure that you're staying in compliance. Also making sure that you have the most up-to-date state and federal posters posted at all of your locations. That's another way that you can stay in compliance. Did that kind of answer the question?
I believe so, yes. And I do want to point out, because I see some of you are asking if this PowerPoint will be emailed afterward, and it will. And we'll also have it live on our Facebook and on our Twitter as well after this presentation. So if you would like to refer back to it any time, you are able to do that. And we have a couple more minutes for any other outstanding questions that you'd like to ask Zoe.
I'm sorry, Karina, could you repeat that?
Then we have a couple more minutes if anyone would like to ask some questions before we close the webinar.
Oh, perfect. Okay, thanks.
Okay, we have another question here. Is there any specific time frame that employers must store employee documents?
That's a great question. So there are different time frames and regulations around how long you have to keep certain documents, whether it be payroll information or old pay stubs, W-2s, all of that type of stuff. And there are different timelines based on federal and state. So without knowing more information, I wouldn't be able to tell you specifically, but it does vary based on federal and state. I will mention with that too is that each form has a different time frame on that too. So it kind of is really a lengthy list. I do have a federal one that I can share with Karina after the training.
Perfect. If there's any more questions, now would be the best time to share. If not, I think we'll be ending the webinar. Oh, we have one more. Can you recommend a source/website for good templates to be completed by our employees, i.e. non-disclosure agreements or non-compete?
So with that one, it's a little complicated. It does depend on your state because, for example, I'm in California and non-competes and non-disclosures aren't really supported in California. My best advice for you would be to consult with an attorney to get a draft going.
All right, we have another question here. Any recommendations on new hire application and termination applications?
Is the question like new hire paperwork and separation paperwork?
Yes, and yeah, exactly.
So it really does vary by state. One of the great things with Paychex is we do offer, new hire forms state specific to all of our clients. So that could be a great opportunity for employers if they're needing extra guidance, especially with HR. This is something as HR generalists that we provide to our clients, along with guidance of how to file and fill out the forms.
Okay, we have another question. Do you have any recommendations as far as a job listing, what length to not exceed? Do you have any input on that?
Are they talking about a job description or a job posting?
Both.
So it really depends on the position. I guess my recommendation would be, keep it to the point of the job. Don't bore the potential applicant. Make sure that the most important information is at the top, just in case that they aren't going to read the entire thing. But also make sure that it does include, kind of like I mentioned before, travel time, physical requirements, anything that could be pertinent to that job. And this would be the place where you don't need to get, completely into detailed information of what the day-to-day would look like. That would be something that you could divulge into more during the interview process.
Alrighty, well, I think we have about another 2 minutes if anyone would like to submit a question. All right, everyone. Well, we thank you so much for joining us, and a big thank you to Zoe and Paychex for having this webinar with us today. As I mentioned, I will be sending around this webinar to you all in a video format, and it would also be on our social media if you'd like to reference it at another time.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Karina. Thank you, everyone. I hope you got a lot out of this training, and I hope you all have a great day.
Thank you, Zoe.
Thanks. Bye.